Check out these GMSS inner fender covers. These things are sick. I love the design. Otis and his team at GMSS do a great job. These things are super easy to install. We're just gonna put it up there, drill a couple holes, riv nuts, bolt, done. That's it. How's it going, everybody? I'm out here playing in the snow. It is cold, but it's shop day. I gotta get some more work done on the truck. Francis looking nice out here in the snow. And yes, I know I need another garage to keep it warm, but I ain't got it right now. I gotta work with what I got. But we're about to jump into this video and let's make more progress on this truck. Even in 10-degree weather, we got to stay motivated. My garage is not heated. I got a tiny little heater in there that might warm it up 5 more degrees, but once I get to moving, once I get to making progress, I get warmed up, and we're going to do it. Let's get these GMSS inner fender covers on this truck. I'm out in my Santa Claus PJs right now because I just got a package. This says Otis on the front, which I know that's GMSS Fab, and I'm so excited because these are going to be my fender caps and my front core support covers. Oh, dude. Oh my gosh. Oh, these are sick. Oh my gosh. I think I get more excited for truck parts as an adult as I did of like toys when I was a kid. Sick. Oh, these look so good. He also made me up some of these front covers. That way it'll kind of finish off the whole front and the sides. Man, these look great. Before we jump into installing these inner fenders on Lucky, I want to explain the why again. I know you guys might have heard this a million times, but I want to make sure if we've got new subscribers to explain why we need factory inner fenders. Whenever you bag your truck, to get it to lay all the way out, we've got to cut out this section of the inner fender to allow the tire to come up through here. On the last episode, you saw me use the simple guide. I installed the simple shocks here because you have to get rid of your spring. But with that being said, you could leave it like this and it looks pretty good because of the simple guide. It's a really clean cut. But to take your truck to the next level, installing these inner fender covers, they're going to cover this and then they're going to cover this section right here, and you will not see any of this stuff that's cut out. The inner fenders are cut out for your factory hinge there, and it's going to cover this whole section. All we have to do is lay the inner fender on there, drill 8 holes, and then use some riv nuts and bolt it all together. The inner fender cover is going to come out a little bit here. We'll mark that in a minute and I'll walk you through that. But that's the reason why. You don't have to have these inner fenders, but you want to have them because these things look sick. And just wait till I'm done with the install and you'll know why exactly. What's cool about the inner fenders is maybe you don't have the budget right now, but you can later on bolt those on at any time. Just make sure to use the simple guide so you don't cut this hole out too far that the inner fenders can't cover it. That guide will help you make sure that the inner fenders work great. All right, I'm starting to freeze out here, so I'm going to tell you the plan so I can get to moving and drilling the holes and install these inner fenders. The first thing you saw in the last episode, I talked about this little spring bracket that I left up top. On the last video, I gave a couple different options for this. You could drill out the spot welds, or you could use a spot weld drill bit. I don't have one of those, unfortunately, not yet. Or if you're not going with factory inner fenders, you could have just left it and ground it down. On my application, I'm just gonna go ahead and drill out all the spot welds with the drill bit, because when I put those inner fenders on there, it's gonna cover this whole top section, so you'll never see those holes. So that's step one. Drill out the spot welds on this and get that removed. Step two is we'll take our inner fender cover and we'll go ahead and lay it back in here and see if it hits anywhere. When I first laid it in there, I saw that it hit a little bit right here. I was able to kind of force it in. The reason you may need to grind down a little on these to make them fit perfect is because when you're putting the front end of these trucks together, they're not all exactly the same. There's a little bit of give to the bolt holes, so yours might be off by a 1/16 of an inch or something. That could affect how well these sit in here. Mine straight out of the box fit in there pretty well. Once the inner fender is sitting in there, we'll go ahead and mark all the holes that are pre-drilled in the inner fender. This front ledge doesn't have any holes in it yet, so we're going to need to measure and mark where we want our 4 bolts to go. Now you can install as many bolts as you want. It doesn't have to be 4. I like to use 4. So what I'll do at that time, I'll probably jack this tire up and see when I turn to make sure I'm not putting the bolts anywhere that I think that they could hit the tire. So it's probably going to be something like right here, and then on the very edges, close to the edge. That way we have our edges bolted down, the middle is snug, and then we'll bolt everything together. After I have the holes marked where it goes on the outside, then I'll need to drill into my factory inner fender, install the riv nuts there, and then we'll be able to lay the inner fender back on there and bolt everything in, and that's it. We'll be grinding a little bit, drilling 16 holes, installing the riv nut and clamping that down, and then bolting the inner fender down to the riv nuts. That is it. I'm hoping this goes by pretty quickly. I'll probably be a little meticulous about making sure it fits really well and looks good. There's a few things that I learned when I installed the inner fenders on Francis. You'll see me in a minute. I'll close down the hood and I'm going to mark off with tape where the edge of the hood is. That way when I put those inner fenders on there, I'll make sure that the inner fender ledge doesn't stick out past the hood. That's something I didn't do on Francis because I didn't have the hood on at the time, so that would have been helpful. On Francis, you can see a little bit of the inner fender through the hood gap because it's a different color. I feel like these being black is going to blend in a lot more and not be as noticeable. I want to get that flange back as far as I can so it's not seen with the hood down. But I'll show you that in just a second. So let's go ahead and get started, get to moving, and get warmed up installing these inner fenders. Like I mentioned, first step is removing this little bracket on here. So what I'm gonna do is use a wax pencil and I'm gonna circle where all the spot welds are, and I'll go ahead and drill those out, and then I'll pry this off. You're gonna see it's not nicely painted under there. I'll touch it up with a little bit of spray paint. Then we'll go ahead and install the inner fender on this side. So the reason I circle them like that is just to see the size of them and to make sure I can see them well. And then I will go back with this step drill bit, unibit, and then drill through. And then I'll pry this off and we'll see what we got. The other bit was trash, so make sure you got a good step bit. These are kind of expensive, but they do a great job. And ladies and gentlemen, that is why you wear safety glasses. As you're taking off the spot welds and you begin to pry, don't pry too hard on getting this thing off because you don't want to bend or warp this top section because that's where the inner fender cover is going to bolt. So you don't want it wavy. We want to keep this as flat as possible. That way when we install and bolt everything in, it's seamless. What I like to use is this rust reformer. You've seen that I use that on a ton of different stuff, especially if it's going under a panel or something like that. just lightly spray this on here, because then this will get covered up and you won't have to worry about the holes that we drilled or this section ever getting rusty. All right, I'm about to close the hood, and this next step is just to make sure the inner fender cover flange right here doesn't stick out past the hood where it's very noticeable. All right, with the hood closed, one thing that happened with Francis is I could see the inner fender flange sticking out. That's probably because it was a different color than the truck, so it was very noticeable. I believe this black will just hide a lot better. I'm going to tape out right where the hood stops, so the inner fender would be flush with where the hood stops. You're going to see it because there's a gap in these trucks that aligns with the body line. That's just part of the design. But if we can make sure that that aligns with how the hood is, that way it doesn't stick out one way or the other and it's very noticeable. So just take some tape, some good tape. One thing that's underrated is good tape. And it's probably because it's 30 degrees out here, but when tape does that stuff, whoo, that's when you test my faith right there. Oh, okay, all right. I like to get a strip that's long enough where I can do it in one little pass right here, and I'm just gonna, you know, there's a lot of eyeballing that I do. Y'all have seen me eyeball before, but I want to just really put this right under, if you're looking straight down on it, right where that hood is going to close. Can't see the inner fender looking straight down on the truck, just like that right there. Remember, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just giving us the guide to make sure that inner fender is flush with where the hood is going to be, so it's not sticking out on one side or the other. So let's see what we got there, and just put the inner fender in there to see if it's even close, to see if this is helpful. Just an idea that I had that I thought might, you know, help line everything up. Go ahead and take your inner fender, and we're just going to slide it in right now. And it could be tight in some spots, but just take note of where it's tight. But first, get it just laying up top like that. I mentioned earlier that it's a little bit tight right here, so that might be an area that I need to grind down. But I'm going to lift the back up first and slide in this part first and see if I can just kind of push it down. All right, as you can see, I messed with it a little bit, and what I did is basically lined up this top right here all the way up to the top to where the gap was the same, where it's almost to the very edge but not hanging over. I don't want this fender part to kind of hang over the turn. I want it to be on the flat spot. That way this hole is almost right in the middle of your factory inner fender, a little bit further. But what I'd like to do is go ahead and mark these holes and drill and riv nut these holes and bolt in this top section. Then we'll push the inner fender down and mark where we want our holes, and then we'll drill through the fender. Because these inner fenders have a little play in them, so when I hold this down where it goes and then I push in right here, that's exactly where I want it as far as where the alignment is. And everything fits really good. There's enough gap right here, so I think that is a good guide. It's hard to kind of maneuver this part of the fender whenever this part is kind of moving with it. So I think if we get this part bolted down, we'll be able to kind of push down on this area and mark where our holes need to go, drill through the fender, then reinstall it back on, and then mark on the fender where the holes need. I couldn't have said that in a more confusing way, but maybe you're following with me. I'm thinking out loud here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's mark our holes up top. It doesn't look like, I mean, it's a tight fit right here, but I think it's fine by installing the front first and then pushing down on the back. It is a little bit tight. If this truck was like a show quality paint job right now, I would have taped back here on the firewall where this kind of hits against to get it into place and then peeled the tape off so I didn't scratch my paint. But in my case, I put this part down first and then slid the back in, put a little bit of force to get it into place, and then now it seems very well aligned where I need it. I'll mark the holes, I'll drill them, we'll riv nut, get the top bolted in. Now we're going to drill the holes to install our riv nuts. This is a 3/8 inch bit, but depending on what riv nuts you get will determine the size hole you need to drill. So go to your instructions or go to your guide that's provided with the riv nuts to make sure you drill the right size hole. If the hole's too big, then this isn't going to install correctly. So if you still have your hood on, I had to get creative. I went with this small impact with a shorty bit on it to get that back one back there. But if you have an angle bit or a short bit, that's tricky to get to, so keep that in mind. Here's the hardware that I'm going to be using to install the GMSS inner fenders. First, we'll start off with some of these M6 by 18-25 bolts. I'm going with all black bolts on this because I have black inner fenders. The engine bay is going to be blacked out, so I want everything to be subtle. The last truck, Francis, I used the chrome with the black beauty ring. It looked really good on that truck, but I'm switching things up on this one. I like bolts that have the Allen head instead of a Phillips head or anything like that, so that's something to keep in mind. I'm working on a hardware kit to put on the website that's going to include all these items as well. Then we have the riv nuts. I talk a lot about these. I love using these things. So these are a M6 riv nut. We'll drill a hole and then we'll slide this riv nut in and then we'll clamp it down just like a rivet, but it's threaded so we can install that hardware. We'll slide the GMSS inner fender on the truck and then we'll mark where we want all the holes. We'll drill those and then we'll put these riv nuts in there and then use the bolt to bolt the cover down to the fender. With the riv nut, you're going to need a tool to be able to do that. This is the one that I prefer. I've linked it before in my videos, but this one works really well. It's not that expensive and it comes with multiple different attachments for different size riv nuts. This is a riv nut tool only. They do make a rivet/riv nut tool. Also, we have these black beauty rings that I'll be installing on the fender, and I'll explain a little bit of that later. I'm not going to install these on every hole, only on the side fender holes, because the inner fender cover already has a dimple in it that looks similar to this, so you don't need that. If you're only installing the GMSS inner fender covers, then you'll just need 16 bolts, 16 of the riv nuts, and then if you want to use the beauty washers, you'll need 8 of those to go on the outside of the fender. To make this easy on everybody, I'm working on a kit that includes all these different hardware items, and that way I'll just stock up on them and I can send out a full kit to you so you can buy the inner fenders, buy my hardware kit with the tools and everything that you need, and be ready to install these as soon as you get the inner fenders. All right, now it's time to grab our riv nut installation tool here, and all you're going to do is make sure it has the M6 or whatever style riv nut you have here. You're going to screw that riv nut on, and again, if it's not right, you'll see it doesn't thread. This is not the right one. Did that on purpose. So you'll butterfly this open like this and screw in your riv nut all the way down till it gets tight there, and then we'll insert this into the hole, and then when we apply pressure down, it's going to squeeze the riv nut up and install it. Go down into the hole, and then we're just going to pull tight. I like to go ahead and screw it down again with it open and just apply a little bit more pressure to make sure it's tight on there, because we don't want that spinning, because if you put the bolt in, it starts to spin, then you're kind of stuck. Now that we have our riv nuts in, let's go ahead and reinstall the fender. As you're doing this, you're checking to make sure all the holes line up. Sometimes when you drill the holes, they can get off just a little bit. You can enlarge the hole in the fender just a little bit if you need more clearance. At any time, if you start to feel this in a bind, immediately take it out and make this hole bigger. You do not want to strip these out. Then you have to redo all the riv nuts. Just get them right to where you feel a good amount of pressure. Again, we're not bolting these in to stay right now. We're only bolting them up to align our outside holes. You don't have to use riv nuts on these, but what I really love about using them is you can unbolt it from the top and pull it off. If you're not using riv nuts, then it's just a little bit more tricky to get these bolted in and to take them off. Using riv nuts allows you to quickly just take these off from the top side and pull this off. If you ever needed to do maintenance or you need to take them off for some reason, this is the easiest way to go, because as quick as I'm putting these on from the top, I can take them off just as quick. Now that I have these bolted in, it's time to do the outside. So now I can push in on the fender and see where it's going to come down on the outside of the fender. And what I'm liking is, as I put pressure down, this little gap between the tape, it's perfect. It's just a little bit off of the tape, but it's still past the little ridge. So now it's just determining where I want to mark these holes and then drill them into this first, and then mark the fender and drill them into the fender. Okay, so I've made my marks here. I'm gonna go from the edge here, 1 inch, 12 inches, 23 inches, and 34. So what that does is put exactly 11 inches in between all the bolts. And look at that. I didn't even measure here, but Otis has also put these 11 inches. So that's awesome. So that's going to match kind of the gaps that we have up front. Right at 1/2 of an inch from the edge. So I found this was 1/2 an inch. So I'm just going to kind of use it as a marker to make sure all of them are centered. So just a quick recap, I started from the end and I went 1 inch, 12 inches, 23, 34. That's one from the edge and then every 11 inches, and that matched the same kind of gap that we had on these front holes here. So now we're going to take that inner fender back off, we're going to drill the holes and then put it back and mark the holes and then drill the holes into the fender. All right, I drilled the 4 holes that I marked there, and now I'm going to put the fender back on there and then use these holes to mark the actual fender to drill the holes for the riv nuts. I know it's a lot of back and forth installing these bolts and nuts, but this is how you're going to ensure that you have everything mocked up correctly. Since this didn't sit exactly flush when we went to install it, I prefer to just keep bolting this in and then marking it and drilling and taking it off. It takes a little bit more time, but you want to make sure you get these holes drilled correctly and everything installed. It's only 16 holes that you have to do this. It's only a couple hour project if you're taking your time and just making sure you're doing it right. So that's what I encourage you to do. Don't get in a hurry with this. I'm going to push down on the inner fender till everything is flush, and then to make sure the gap where the tape is the same. That's why that tape is important. It helps keep this in a straight line. Now we're just going to go through and we'll mark each hole right here, holding it in place right in the center. And then that's all we need. Now it's time. We'll take this back off one more time, drill the holes, riv nut it, and then install the inner fender back on here, and that's a wrap. perfect. That's exactly where I wanted it. It's tucked back under the hood. The only way that you can see it is to be about eye level with it, but at the angle, you can't see it, and it's black, so it kind of blends in with the shadow. That looks really good. I like how that turned out. There it is. One side is done. And yeah, on these, I just used the regular bolts in here where it was dimpled. And then I came and I used a beauty washer and the same bolt on the outside to give the same kind of look with the washer and then with this. And it really looks good. All bolt in, just drilling a couple holes, bolting it in. Here's what it looks on the back side. Clears the hood hinge. Clears it nicely. You can use the simple shocks with those right there. I'm going to find some spray paint that matches the same sheen as this, and then spray paint the inners that same kind of matte sheen. These are powder coated by a buddy, but if you're just wanting to spray paint them, then you could spray paint your whole engine bay and then your inner fenders too, and everything would match. Or you could paint these the same color as the truck. All right guys, we've got one side down. Now it is time to move to the driver's side. So I've got my other driver's side inner fender, and since we've already installed one side, I know what the measurements are to drill the holes to bolt these into the fender. So before I start, I'm going to go ahead and measure. Now that we have the front inner fender covers installed, we can move to the radiator support covers. So all we're going to do with these, again, we're going to place them up there. We're going to have to drill a couple different holes, put some rivets, and then install them the same way that we did the inner fenders. Here's a couple things to know about these inner fenders. The front two holes are going to bolt into your factory holes, and you can use your factory hardware if you want. If you've bought the hardware kit from me or you've bought some on your own, then what I would do is drill out the threaded holes that you have under here and then install a riv nut with the hardware that you've been provided. All the upper holes will need to be marked and drilled. After we put it up there, we mark all the holes, we drill them out, we install the riv nuts, we will tighten everything down. The middle section, you'll notice whenever we get to this middle section, we'll have a couple different options for you to do. You can either drill a hole in the top and bolt it through your radiator support, or you can just leave it unbolted and it'll kind of just sit there. We'll decide what we're gonna do on Lucky whenever we get to that point. Let's go ahead and just set these on the truck and start to look at where the holes are gonna be drilled and what we need to do next. On these front covers, you don't have to have them, but it is really nice to have these with the inner fender covers because the way these are designed on the edge here, it gives a nice clean finish that blends into the inner fender covers. So I recommend these. Go ahead and add these on whenever you get the inner fender covers. That way the whole front of your truck is really clean and it all looks the same with the same hardware and the same kind of styling. All we're going to do is take this front cover and we're just going to sit it down. And what I like to do, since these front two holes right here, since they actually line up with the factory holes, that's where I want to align it first. What I'm going to do is take the factory bolts temporarily, and I'm just going to put them in here just to kind of hold it into place. And that's going to help us make sure when we mark these top holes to drill that they're not going to be moving around or getting out of line. What I like to do here is once I get this hand tight, I want to push in onto the cover all the way against the core support here. This is going to overhang just a hair from this, but you want this pushed back as far as you can because these turn signal lights, they'll get really close to scraping this. On Francis, I didn't pay attention. I actually pulled these out and made them flush with the back of this, and it pulled it out just a little bit. So when I shut my hood, that light hit on the top of it and scuffed it a little bit. So I've learned to push in all the way, and we're going to marker holes from the top. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a gap in between these and the top. Whenever we go to bolt these down, it'll pull it tight. There may be a little bit of a gap even after you have it all the way tight just because of the design. It's hard to design these perfectly with everything, but it will all match up, and when you get it bolted down, it'll look really good. Now that we have it pushed in where we want it, we'll just go through, go straight down, make a little mark. Make a little mark here. What I've noticed is this hole right here, there's actually a bigger hole under it. To make it work, what we'll do is just put the hardware in there and put a washer and nut on the bottom side. Now on the front holes, you have a couple different options here. These front holes, since they align, you could just use your factory bolts. But if you want all your hardware to match, you can either get hardware that's the same size as these bolts and bigger rib nuts and stuff. But since I have these M6 hardware kits, I like to use those. So I just like to drill out the two threads here to the same size as a rib nut and put rib nuts in there as well. That way everything has the same hardware. It takes the same tools to get it apart, and you don't have to have 2 or 3 different things to replace everything. We've got the 4 rib nuts in there. I'm going to put this back on there and just bolt down, hand tighten some of the hardware, make sure everything aligns correctly. I'm going to tighten everything down slowly, just a little bit at a time, just till it starts to get tight. I will go ahead and tighten down these front ones all the way. Nice, so as I bolted that down tighter, it pulled it really tight right here, and that's what I was looking for. This is flush, because before there was a little bit of a gap, but again, that's why you kind of line everything up and then tighten it down. Perfect. That looks awesome. That was super easy, drilling the holes, rib nuts, and as I bolted everything down, it pulled it tight. There was a gap right here, but that's all pulled tight. Everything lines up well. It was very easy to drill out the threaded parts right here and install rib nuts. That worked out good. So the only thing that we have left is the front section. Here's the main decision that you have to make with these front brackets and where to bolt them in here. This is your factory radiator supports. If you're going to leave that in, what it does is it sandwiches in between this bracket onto the radiator like this, and then it slides up under that, just like that right there. This is how it is from the factory. So you can push this back and then just drill a hole into the top and bolt it. But if you look from the top side kind of sticks out toward me, kind of just a little bit toward me. So that may bother you that it's not exactly lined up in the center. What I did on Francis is I removed this upper bracket, like this right here. Whenever you get rid of this, you can install an L bracket on the side of the radiator into the radiator support, and it holds it nicely and it cleans up this whole section. I think that's what I want to do instead of having the big bracket. I'm going to have an all black radiator up here with the nice cap and all that kind of stuff, so it may help clean up the front section of this. But if I do that, then I can push this back further and it gets it really close to even on the back side here. That would help cover up this hole. I could drill a hole up top and bolt it in directly to these holes where the radiator support was. And that looks pretty clean if you look at it like that. Once I sand this down and I paint it all black, it'll look really nice. Or your other option is if you wanted it all the way against it, you could bolt it in the front here, and this is kind of like the factory style is, but I don't really like this bracket being in front of this and it doesn't look as seamless. So I think my decision is going to be, I'm going to bolt this bracket back in, then I'm going to push this in and then drill a hole up top to bolt in this from up top through these radiator holes right here. And I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Check it out. This looks awesome. I love this. The simple shocks with the inner fender covers and the front covers as well. It helps just really finish off your engine bay. And all this stuff combined is not that expensive to get this kind of look. This is super professional. You could pull this up at any show and pop your hood and people would notice. Guys, I mentioned before this is a game changer, and I truly believe that, because any do-it-yourself person that can drill some holes and do some riv nuts can get this type of professional look for their inner fenders and their engine bay. This looks killer. So on this side I use the black stainless hardware, and then on this side I've got the stainless steel hardware kit. This is available on the website. So here's an example of the black hardware kit that I have that's got the black beauty washers and the stainless bolts. I'll also carry the same kit that has the stainless beauty washers and the stainless bolts as well. That's available on the website. You can get that with this kit. I've got it all kind of bunched together in the inner fender fabrication section of my website. You can get the simple guides, the inner fender cover, the simple shocks, the hardware kit, everything that you need. And I can go ahead and add these onto the website as well now that I've installed them on my truck. Guys, I'm so pumped about how this turned out, because It wasn't a ton of work, drilling some holes, putting in some riv nuts. The shocks were super easy to do as well. Simple Guide made that hole in the fender easy. And this is like a Saturday project. If you woke up and you had your shocks, the inner fender template, and the inner fenders and your hardware, you could knock this all out in a day by yourself, no issues.